Welcome to IVF This, episode 99, The Gift of Constraint. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well. We are on the heels, nipping at the heels of episode 100. And I cannot even begin to adequately express my gratitude to each and every one of you. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. This podcast and everything that has happened over the last 2 years has been nothing short of miraculous. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for everything. Now, something I do want to mention is that there is another Ask Emily Anything call scheduled for Tuesday, December 13th. So this episode drops on December 12th, so it's the very next day. You don't need to register for it. It's completely complimentary. It's an hour long where you can join and either use the Q&A function to anonymously ask questions and I'll answer them, or you can raise your hand and I can bring you up and be coached live. Either option is absolutely perfect. I leave the topics completely open, but I tend to have a topic that I specifically cover if there just aren't any questions or you want to hear me talk in depth about something. So since we've spent the last few weeks, and again, this episode talking about aspects of perfectionism and how to overcome it, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that for anyone who wants to join and to see what comes up for them. But truly, there is no topic that's off limits for these calls. So let's get into it. The title is The Gift of Constraint, which might seem odd, but if you hang with me for a little bit, I'm going to explain why constraint is a great thing. The definition of constraint is to limit something. One of the many perfectionistic lies that we are sold from the media, our peers, our own drunken a-hole that's in our brain is that what we are doing is either right or wrong, not good enough, and rarely do we ever tell ourselves that we're enough, and it can pretty much be anything that you're referring to, right? Work, your health, your relationships, your skincare regimen, and of course, your efforts to have and make babies. A few podcasts ago, I mentioned the book, It Starts with the Egg. I want to reiterate that I do not have any beef with this book or the author, but what some have turned that book into is like a manual for what has to be done in order to be successful. But it's not just It Starts with the Egg. I'm going to zoom out for a second because I want you to think of It Starts with the Egg as like a microcosm of how our society functions around these how-to or health, self-improvement, books, articles, videos, recommendations, all the things. Someone takes a situation or event and their process for improving that experience or changing their circumstances. Weight loss is probably the most universal example of this. And the authors or creators try to extrapolate their results and process it out for mass consumption. This type of marketing heavily relies on perfectionism and black and white thinking in order to capitalize on it. Now, I'm not suggesting that anyone is trying to manipulate you with their offer. I do believe that most people come with pure intentions of helping, but the marketing strategy is very manipulative. So again, it starts with the egg. And remember, I'm only using this book as an example of a larger issue. How many of us have either heard of it, its recommendations, or have even read it? Like how many of us? I know I have. I read it mostly as kind of a educational, I wonder what people are talking about sort of thing, right? So if you're not familiar with it, which is fine, it's a book that was written by a biotech patent litigation attorney named Rebecca Fett. Ms. Fett has degrees in molecular biotechnology and biochemistry. She is an extraordinarily intelligent and accomplished woman, right? This is not against her. She is also someone that experienced infertility and went through a few rounds of IVF. Her first round was not successful, and she was told she had a very low probability of conceiving with her own eggs. So she underwent this heavily researched experiment of adding supplements, many lifestyle changes to prepare for her next round of IVF, which was much more successful than the first. So this is common, right? In writing, we call it the hero's journey. You're struggling with something and then you share what you did to help yourself get through it, that trial, and explain how it can be helpful to others. I do the same thing. Again, there's nothing wrong with it. What happened with Miss Rebecca Fett's work was that people took this personal experiment, which was basically like a literature review that she conducted and tried some stuff on herself, and made it mean that this was the only way, or leaning heavily into it. Except the book was really about, again, her review of scientific research surrounding a lot of big questions that we have in infertility, which is how to improve sperm and or egg quality, and making her recommendations based off of that research. I also think she did an update in like 2018 or 2019 based on newer research, right? So you might be asking yourself, Emily, what the hell does this have to do with constraint? Such a great question. I'm so glad you asked. Within that book, right, this is again an example. There are 10 different supplements that are suggested, along with specific dosing and brand recommendations. There are dramatic overhauls in lifestyle, like eliminating BPA, eliminating toxins. She goes into a lot of great detail about fragranced lotions, candles, all sorts of things. This is, I would argue, a scientifically dense book, right? And she also makes some recommendations for food and exercise too. Again, we're using this book as an example of a microcosm of perfectionism. So it's important to understand how many people did and still do take these recommendations and the author's IVF success to mean that this or some very close variation of this is the quote unquote right way to do IVF. Last episode, I talked about overwhelm, and this is a perfect example of something that contributes to overwhelm. What if the brand or dosage is not available to you where you live? Maybe you've had previous adverse reactions to one or some of the supplements, not like life-threatening, but maybe it made you feel uncomfortable, made you nauseous, whatever, right? Maybe it's not financially feasible for you to throw out all of your Tupperware and replace them with glass products, or throw out your entire beauty regimen and replace it with all organic, non-fragranced options. Maybe you're working 2 jobs to help pay for your treatments, so access and time to plan, find, prepare, and eat locally sourced organic foods just is not an option for you. Maybe your exercise routine consists of a 20-minute walk some days during a break from work, but because of your other obligations, it's just hard to be consistent. Maybe you're getting treatment for a mental health condition, you're anxious about the medication impacting or impeding pregnancy. We could probably create a 2-hour-long episode based solely on these types of questions. And this is where giving yourself the gift of restraint is just that, a gift. Perfectionism tells you that you have to do it all and it has to be perfect. I can't do a 20-minute yoga video. I have to do a 45-minute yoga video 5 to 6 times per week. I can't eat instant white rice because there are chemicals in it. I have to eat white rice from Whole Foods that has to be soaked for 5 to 7 days, and the only eating window for it is about 5 minutes once prepared, because then it will dissolve into sand or something, right? I can't find this one specific type of CoQ10 vitamin that everyone on the forums recommends, so I'm going to stress myself out and have it shipped internationally at twice the price, or not be able to purchase it at all and then bully myself for it. That is the lie of perfectionism. It's all or nothing. It's black and white. It's not the world we live in. The world we live in is messy, nuanced, and very, very gray. When we try to live up to this perfectionistic fantasy, more often than not, we are left immobilized and imprisoned by our thoughts. We might make forward movement, but we're probably still going to be jerked to ourselves about it. We tend to villainize and place moral value on things like exercise and especially food. I think very often for most of us, what we're trying to do by these perfectionistic standards is earn the right, earn the worth to have our baby, to get pregnant, right? Because ultimately it always comes down to a belief in your worth, a belief in your worthiness. Right? So the gift of constraint is making decisions based on your priorities in the most realistic manner possible. Maybe easily prepared food that ingredients include shelf-stable, cost-effective items is the most realistic option for you because one of your priorities is preparing more of your meals at home. They don't have to look like pictures from organic food bloggers' dinner, people. It just doesn't have to be that way. Maybe you and your doctor talk about some supplement recommendations and you choose to focus on CoQ10 and a prenatal because that's what you can afford, it's accessible to you, and you can remember to take them. Maybe taking 5 minutes to journal is something you choose to prioritize for your mental health during this time. Maybe you select one IVF or infertility Facebook group to follow instead of getting conflicting information from 5 different groups. Maybe you prioritize sleep over physical exercise because of your schedule. All of these are examples of constraint. So here is your exercise to practice this. And as always, this process includes a no bullying clause. If, while you're doing this exercise, you find yourself bullying yourself, talking smack, telling yourself it's not enough, I want you to put your pen down or your phone, whatever it is you're using to take notes, put it down. Cleaning up your thinking beforehand is just as important as actually doing the exercise. I want you to remind yourself that those thoughts are based in a perfectionistic mindset, and they're not attainable. We are shooting for good enough. Okay? The beauty of good enough is that you get to decide what is good enough. It's subjective and personal, so there will be 8 billion different ideas of what good enough is, and you are the only one that gets to decide what that means for you. So clean up your thinking. When you're ready, I want you to write down the goal that you have. You can use this for literally anything, any goal, but we're going to focus on an upcoming IVF cycle, an egg retrieval cycle. So what's your goal? Try to make it specific. I want 10 5-day embryos to freeze. I want 3 euploid embryos. That's if you're doing genetic testing, right? Get specific. Nothing's going to happen to you if you set a specific goal. If you don't get it, we have options like, right, the planning for failure episode. If it goes above the goal, you're not going to beat yourself up for having a goal of 10 when you actually come out with 12, okay? So under the goal, right, you're going to specify the goal, and then under it, I want you to write this out. This is an outcome I cannot control. It is very important when you're goal setting to recognize where you do and do not have control. So under this is an outcome I cannot control, you write, these are the things I am willing to do to support that goal and myself along the way. Now, I hardly ever give specific directives, but if you're going to do this exercise, I want you to write those 2 things. This is an outcome I cannot control, and these are the things that I'm willing to do to help support that goal and myself along the way. I want you to write those verbatim. These are the things that I'm willing to do to support that goal and myself along the ways. Then you set your priorities. Maybe it's replacing all of your plastic because it's something that you've been saving for and you're tired of having spaghetti stained Tupperware. Beautiful. You get a twofer right there. Maybe it's focusing on working with a counselor or a coach for your mental health. Maybe it's 30 minutes of walking a few days per week, journaling, certain foods you want to prioritize. There's no wrong answer, friends. You are the only one that gets to decide what your priorities are for any given moment. Maybe all of the other stuff is just too much noise for you. That's not a problem. And you want to focus on making sure that you take your medications correctly and getting to all of your appointments on time. That's perfect. The point is that there's no right or wrong way to do this stuff. But when you exercise constraint, when you focus on things that will serve you and your goal in the most realistic way possible, you are serving yourself in a most loving way. You are not setting yourself up for overwhelm. You exercise discernment and compassion. Now, the last part that we need to cover is the idea that you will regret not doing quote unquote more. That you'll judge yourself or beat yourself up for what you're doing or doing this or doing that or whatever, right? Here's the thing. We only do that retroactively. We get to the end of something, or I guess I should say, I'm going to interrupt myself, and I'm going to say that we typically only do that retroactively. We get to the end of something, and then we're like, well, shit, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done this more, right? Hear me when I say this. There is zero upside to experiencing disappointment and then telling yourself a crappy story about how it's your fault. Zero, zilch, nada, no upside. We do all of these things. We do all of these things because we think if we do them, if we get to tell ourselves that we did everything that we could, then we can be kinder to ourselves. But who is measuring the everything we could? If it's you, and you've made a conscious decision to constrain, and you like your reasons for what you've decided, then the regret will not linger. The question of what could I have done will be answered because you deliberately made the decisions based on what you believe is best for you. There's no one that would be wiser to that. It's when you start throwing spaghetti on the wall and feeling completely out of control and overwhelmed, that's when you don't have your back, right? That's when you're not standing up for yourself. That's not when you're being compassionate to yourself. That's when you're beating yourself up. That's when you're being an a-hole to yourself, not the other way around. You get to choose. Always. You get to decide. Regret isn't something that is inevitable. It's an emotion created by your thinking. So if you're deliberately deciding this is a priority of mine and this is what I'm willing to do based on that priority to support myself and my goal, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to manage your mind regardless of the outcome. This is the gift of constraint. You are setting yourself up to be your own ally, your own advocate, your own best friend, to have your own back. That is a beautiful gift and one that I wish for each and every one of you. Okay, that is what I have for you this week. Have a great week, my friends, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard and want to learn more, head over to ivfthiscoaching.com. That's www.ivfthiscoaching.com.